Okay, let's get into this. We are diving into a monumental figure today, someone whose work is so recognizable. It's literally defined the American wilderness for nearly a century.
It really has.
We're talking about Ansel Adams, who lived from 1902 to 1984.
And I think we need to look past the iconic posters you see on dorm room walls or the majestic museum prints.
Right.
Adams was not just a nature photographer. He was a foundational figure who completely changed how the art of photography was both perceived and, just as importantly, how it was technically executed.
That's the core of it, isn't it?
Mhm.
Our source material for this deep dive is this really comprehensive biographical and technical file that charts his entire fascinating career.
It's incredible stuff.
And our mission here is singular, to really unpack Adams' dual identity. On one hand, the rigorous technical innovator, and on the other, the passionate, lifelong conservation advocate whose camera was his main tool for environmental protection.
You can't separate the two. For Adams, the artistic pursuit of beauty it was inextricably linked to the moral obligation of preservation. We're looking at a career that was driven by both precision and a kind of prophecy.
So, to structure this, we're going to hit three crucial pillars that really defined his whole trajectory. First, the surprising and total pivot he made, transforming himself from a focused classical pianist into a photographer.
Which is such a wild story in itself.
It is. Then second, the revolutionary aesthetic shift he championed, moving away from the popular soft-focus art form of the day, pictorialism,
Right.
into the hyper-sharp, detailed world of pure photography, which all culminated in the creation of Group F64.
And finally, we will break down his unparalleled technical and institutional legacy. These are the two areas where his impact endures most profoundly.
So that means really explaining the zone system, which standardized exposure control for generations of photographers.
Yes, and detailing his crucial role in successfully legitimizing photography as a fine art in major institutions like the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA.
A life defined by mountains, light, and just an unwavering discipline. So where did that discipline come from? Let's start at the beginning. The unusual foundations of his early life, that initial ambition for the concert stage, and the moment Yosemite became his ultimate catalyst. Part 1. The making of a meticulous mind. So Ansel Adams was born in the Fillmore district of San Francisco in 1902, the only child of Charles Hitchcock Adams and Olive Bray. And right away, his childhood was far from conventional. It began with a literal seismic event.
Indeed. One of his earliest, most profound memories was the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. He was only 4 years old.
Just a toddler.
And he was reportedly uninjured in the initial shaking, which was traumatic enough, but a really significant aftershock struck about 3 hours later, and it threw the child face first into a garden wall.
And that event left a permanent physical mark on him, didn't it?
It did, yes. His nose was broken and scarred, and it remained permanently crooked for the rest of his life. And this was more than just a visible trait. It meant he became a persistent mouth breather. It's this profound physical marker from a formative, chaotic event, and you can almost feel it setting the stage for a personality that would later crave control and structure.
And his youth sounds like it was challenging beyond just that. The sources describe him as hyperactive, constantly prone to sickness, and, increasingly hypochondriacal.
Right. He had very few friends, and his attempts at formal education were, let's just say, not successful.
Not successful is an understatement.
It really is. He was so restless and difficult to manage that he was dismissed from several private schools. By the time he was 12, his father took the radical step of just removing him entirely from formal schooling. Instead, he was educated at home by private tutors and family, including his Aunt Mary.
His father, Charles Adams, clearly played the most formative role there, especially in shaping his moral and intellectual outlook. He was basically his primary teacher during those critical adolescent years.
Absolutely vital. Charles Adams held a respectable position as the secretary-treasurer of the Astronomical Society of the Pacific, and they shared a hobby in astronomy. But more importantly, Charles instilled in his son the foundational values of the great American transcendentalist Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, the importance of a modest, moral life guided by social responsibility to both man and nature.
So that concept of social responsibility came through the lens of philosophy and astronomy, long before he even picked up a serious camera.
It was his bedrock. It was the foundation. And this moral code stuck with Ansel Adams throughout his entire life. He later articulated this belief system beautifully, saying, "I believe in beauty. I believe in stones and water, air and soil, people and their future and their fate.
That's not just flowery language. You can tell it's a deep moral commitment.
Exactly. It viewed the preservation of the natural world as a fundamental human obligation.
This really strong connection with his father stands in such powerful contrast to the relationship he had with his mother, Olive. The sources indicate it was pretty distant, and she actually disapproved of his growing interest in photography.
The contrast is palpable. And the distance in that relationship is underscored by a really stark, almost brutal anecdote after her death in 1950. Adams, who valued thrift and simplicity, values maybe inherited from Emerson, chose the absolute minimum for her funeral. Specifically, a $260 coffin.
That seems incredibly rigid, especially for someone who, by 1950, was already an established cultural figure.
It does. It reveals a side of Adams that was just intensely focused on his own moral code, sometimes at the expense of social convention. When the undertaker challenged him, making some crack about how cheap the coffin was,
Wow.
Adams's response was immediate and fierce. He said, "One more crack like that and I will take Mama elsewhere." It's a very telling moment about their strained relationship and his unwavering, almost defiant sense of what was right.
Okay, let's pivot to the other passion that defined his youth. A passion he pursued with that same hyperactive focus we're seeing, music. For a full decade, he was absolutely determined to be a classical pianist.
And this is so crucial for understanding his rigor as an adult. It started when he was 12. After hearing his neighbor, the experimental composer Henry Cowell, play, Adams became instantly and intensely interested in the piano. He taught himself to play and read music with incredible speed.
And this wasn't just a casual hobby for him. This was a serious, like a vocational pursuit.
Extremely serious. For the next 10 years, he devoted himself entirely to music. He worked constantly to perfect his technique and expression under 3 different music teachers. His dedication was total. I mean, he even gave piano lessons himself just so he could afford a grand piano.
So that shows that financial sacrifices were secondary to achieving technical mastery.
Completely.
So if he was that dedicated, and we know he was considered a gifted pianist by qualified judges, why did he ultimately abandon the concert stage? Why make that decisive break?
Well, he came to a self-imposed, brutally honest realization about his own limits. He felt his hands were simply too small, which restricted the repertoire of complex pieces he could tackle.
Oh.
So he concluded that, despite his prodigious talent, his destiny was only going to be as a concert pianist of limited range, or an accompanist or a teacher, not the primary artistic calling that he desired.
It's fascinating how the inability to achieve absolute mastery in one field immediately led him to transfer that exact same intensity and discipline to another.
Yes.
He didn't lose the need for perfection, he just changed the medium.
Exactly. The discipline he gained from a decade of studying scales and tone and composition wasn't lost. It was simply transferred directly into the discipline of the photographic darkroom, which demands the exact same level of technical precision and pre-visualization. The structure of music prepared him perfectly for the zone system.
And the photographic awakening occurred literally in the summer of 1916. He was 14 when he first visited Yosemite National Park with his family. What was the impact of that first trip?
It was instantaneous and overwhelming. He wrote, "The splendor of Yosemite burst upon us, and it was glorious. A new era began for me." The moment he stepped into that landscape, all the restless energy of his youth finally found its focus.
And his father gave him the key to capturing that new reality.
A simple foundational tool, an Eastman Kodak Brownie box camera. And Adams immediately attacked photography with his usual hyperactive enthusiasm. But Yosemite became more than just a subject for him.
How so?
A later visit, after he had contracted the Spanish flu in 1918, apparently cured him of the cleanliness compulsion that he had developed. So this cemented Yosemite's importance as a restorative, spiritual, and moral location in his mind.
So it was therapy, a home, and his primary subject all in one.
And critically, it was his gateway to conservation. He quickly joined the Sierra Club at age 17, immersing himself in the community dedicated to preserving the wilderness he loved. He served as the caretaker of the LeConte Memorial Lodge from 1920 to 1923, and later was elected to the board of directors in 1934, serving for a remarkable 37 years.
So this wasn't a side interest. It was a life's purpose tied inextricably to his art.
It was everything. And we see the continued influence of philosophical kinship there, too, notably his friendship with the violinist and amateur photographer Cedric Wright.
Right. Wright was a crucial mentor.
The huge mentor. They'd shared a deep philosophical foundation drawn from Edward Carpenter's book, Towards Democracy, which championed the pursuit of beauty in life and art as a guiding principle. This shared philosophy gave Adams the intellectual framework to blend his technical mastery with his moral advocacy. He started linking those two pursuits, the camera and the cause, right away.
This discipline and focus brings us directly into part two, the radical shift to pure photography. So when Adams first started publishing his work in 1921, he wasn't yet the sharp focus master that we all recognize. He was following the popular style of the time, known as pictorialism.
That's the starting point for his revolution. Pictorialism was the dominant aesthetic in the mid-1920s. Think of it this way. Photographers at the time felt that photography was a lesser art form compared to painting.
So they were trying to make it look like something else.
They were trying desperately to make their photographs look like paintings.
How did they actually achieve that look? What were the techniques?
They aimed for a soft focus, diffused light, and they manipulated the printing process using techniques like the bromoil process, which gave the prints a sort of brushstroke, painterly texture. The goal was to capture the mood or the glowing luminosity of a scene rather than its stark reality.
And his early work reflects that.
Absolutely. Adams's early work, like Lodgepole Pines, Lyell Fork of the Merced River from 1921, perfectly exemplifies this soft, dreamy aesthetic.
But Adams was rigid. He had to perfect things. By 1925, he completely rejected this style. Why the total break?
Because pictorialism obscured detail and it removed control. For a mind trained in the precise structure of music, that diffused, soft-focus aesthetic was fundamentally unsatisfying. So he shifted to a realistic approach that emphasized razor-sharp focus, heightened contrast, and required extremely precise darkroom work.
He wanted to use the camera's mechanical precision, not hide it. And this is where the concept of visualization really crystallizes, specifically with the production of Monolith, the Face of Half Dome in 1927. This image wasn't just a composition, it was a technical leap.
It was a defining moment in his career. He was using a large format Corona view camera, shooting onto glass plates. And he realized the image as he captured it wasn't expressing the emotional impact the scene had on him. He felt the sky needed to be dramatically darker, almost black, to emphasize the stark white rock face.
But to achieve that, he had to take a massive technical gamble, right?
A huge risk. He only had one plate left. He visualized the final effect, how the scene felt to him, before taking the shot. He put on a dark red filter, which dramatically reduces blue light transmission, and calculated an exposure that, when combined with later development techniques, would render the blue sky virtually black.
So visualization wasn't just composing the scene through the viewfinder. It was imagining the entire technical process, the exposure, the development, the printing, to achieve a predetermined, dramatic, emotional result.
Exactly. It's a moment he moved from documenting the world to interpreting it through scientific means. This extreme manipulation of tonal values in Monolith established his core concept of visualization, which he first formally defined in print in 1934. It's the idea that the photograph exists as a perfect mental image before the shutter is ever clicked.
So what external influences helped solidify this commitment to sharpness and precision, pulling him completely away from that painterly impulse?
His visits to Taos, New Mexico proved vital. Guided by his patron, Albert M. Bender, he was introduced to the artists of the Southwest, notably Georgia O'Keeffe, and crucially, the West Coast master photographer Paul Strand.
Paul Strand seems to have been the final catalyst, showing Adams what was really possible with technical purity.
Strand's negatives were revolutionary at the time. They were simple, detailed, and almost shockingly sharp. Adams was profoundly impressed. Seeing Strand's work convinced him that photography could stand on its own as a medium if it just embraced its native strengths: sharp detail and accurate rendering.
And Strand gave him a practical tip, too.
He did. A simple technical suggestion that Adams adopted immediately: use glossy paper to intensify the tonal values, which emphasizes the very sharpness that pictorialists had deliberately tried to suppress.
This philosophical and technical momentum led to the foundation of Group F64 in 1932. And this wasn't just a photography club, it was a radical statement of purpose.
It was an aesthetic declaration of war. Adams co-founded it with Edward Weston and Imogen Cunningham, among others. The name itself is the key to their whole philosophy. For you who might be familiar with cameras, f/64 is a tiny aperture setting used on large format view cameras.
And what does using such a small aperture do for the image?
It ensures maximum depth of field and, critically, razor-sharp focus across the entire plane of the image. The entire photograph, from the closest foreground pebble to the distant mountain peak, is in perfect focus. They chose that name to symbolize their total rejection of the soft, blurry aesthetic of pictorialism.
And their manifesto really codified what they stood for. How did they define pure photography?
It was defined as possessing no qualities of technique, composition, or idea derivative of any other art form. They advocated for straight photography, unmanipulated, sharp focus, using the full tonal range, and contact printing. Their stance was that photography should develop along lines defined by its own inherent mechanical nature, independent of older aesthetic conventions like painting.
But hold on, if they insisted on straight photography, how did Adams, who used extreme filtration and darkroom manipulation on monolith, reconcile that rigid realism with his earlier concept of visualization? That seems like a contradiction.
That is the essential, fascinating tension within Adams's career. Group F64 advocated against derivative techniques, things like bromoil or soft focus lenses designed to imitate painting. They were against the look of soft art. However, Adams argued that manipulating tone, darkening a sky with a red filter, or adjusting contrast in the darkroom was the unique, expressive language of the photographic medium itself. He wasn't trying to make it look like a charcoal sketch. He was simply maximizing the emotional capacity of the black and white print, which he believed was still pure photography.
So manipulation of tone was fine, but manipulation of texture and focus to imitate painting was a betrayal.
Exactly. The focus had to be sharp, the texture had to be real, but the tonal values were entirely subservient to the photographer's preconceived vision. And this revolutionary idea met significant opposition.
I can imagine. It sounds like a real aesthetic battleground pitting technical purists against traditionalists.
It was intense. Adams famously referred to one of their most prominent pictorialist opponents, William Mortensen, as the Antichrist. Mortensen argued that the F64 work was hard and brittle. The pictorialists felt this new work was devoid of soul and was merely technical documentation. Adams and the purists, however, well, they ultimately won the long game by convincing major art institutions that technical precision was art.
The aesthetic desire for pure photography demanded absolute technical control. It wasn't enough to just advocate for sharp images. Adams needed a system to guarantee them. This leads us directly into part 3, the mastery of the medium and the creation of the zone system.
This is where Adams bridges that gap between technician and artist. The zone system wasn't a solitary invention. Adams developed it collaboratively with a portrait photographer named Fred Archer around 1939-1940 while they were teaching at the Art Center School in Los Angeles.
So let's try to demystify the zone system for the listener. It has this reputation for being incredibly complex, but at its heart, it's a calibrated scale derived from the science of sensitometry. What does that mean in practical terms?
Think of it like a musical score for light. Sensitometry is simply the measurement of how photographic materials, film, and paper react to light. The zone system took that science and turned it into an actionable scale.
A tool?
A tool, yes. A calibrated scale of brightness running from zone 0, which is pure, absolute black with no detail, up through 9 shades of gray to zone X, which is pure, blinding white.
And zone V, right in the middle, is middle gray.
Correct. Zone V represents the tone of an 18% gray card, which is what your standard exposure meter assumes everything in the world should be.
So if a standard meter only tries to make everything zone V, what did the zone system allow Adams to do that was so revolutionary?
It allowed him to pre-visualize the final tonality of every single element in the scene, and then deliberately control the process to ensure those elements landed on the intended zones. A standard meter tells you how to expose the entire scene to average out to zone V. Adams would use light readings for key elements, say, the texture of a dark rock face.
Which he might want at zone 3.
Exactly, zone 3. And then the bright highlights in the sky, maybe he wants those at zone 7.
So he's collecting multiple pieces of data, not just one average.
Yes, and here's where the discipline of music comes right back in. The zone system provided unprecedented control over both exposure, how long light hits the film, and development, how long the film is processed in chemicals. If he wanted to emphasize contrast, he could modify the development time. A technique called expansion or compression, often notated as N+1 or N1.
Can you give us a concrete example of that control? How would that work in the field?
Certainly. Imagine Adams is photographing a brilliant snow scene in bright sunlight. Snow, being extremely bright, wants to fall in zone 8 or IX, but if it's overexposed, you lose all texture. It just becomes white paper.
Right, just a white blob.
Exactly. If he uses normal development, what he calls N, the contrast might be too harsh, blowing out the highlights. The zone system allows him to decide, I will underexpose slightly, and then I will shorten the development time. That's N1, or compression.
And what does that compression actually do to the negative?
It squeezes the tonal range of the negative. It makes the bright snow less dense, ensuring that when he goes to print it, there's still discernible texture and detail in those white areas. He has complete control over the input exposure and the processing development to ensure the final print matches his pre-visualized image perfectly. It turns light into a malleable substance.
And this precision allowed his images to become powerful tools, connecting his technical expertise right back to his lifetime commitment to environmental protection. His photos were, in essence, political manifestos disguised as beautiful art.
He was intensely motivated by the commercial incursions he was witnessing in the wilderness areas he loved, Yosemite, getting golf courses and bowling alleys and shops. He understood that his majestic, technically perfect images had a persuasive power that mere text or political arguments often lacked.
And we see that political success tied directly to the Kings Canyon designation in California.
This is a perfect example of art-driving policy. In 1938, he created the limited edition book Sierra Nevada, the John Muir Trail. This was not a commercial venture. It was created specifically to aid the Sierra Club's lobbying efforts.
And it worked.
It did. The dramatic, sharp, imposing images of that untouched landscape, combined with Adams's personal testimony before Congress, were absolutely vital in convincing legislators to designate Kings Canyon as a national park in 1940.
And this is where the technical story and the human mythos just collide in one single image. The legend of Moonrise, Hernandez, New Mexico, taken in 1941.
The context here is crucial. Adams was on a road trip with his friends working on this ambitious mural project for the National Park Service, documenting national parks and reservations. They were driving near the small village of Hernandez as the sun was setting and the moon was rising.
Describe the moment he saw it. The urgency must have been palpable, given the rapidly fading light.
It was a race against time. He described seeing this modest village, a graveyard, and mountains in the background, all beneath a rapidly darkening sky with this high, brilliant moon. He slammed on the brakes, scrambling to set up his 8x10 view camera. The light was dying so quickly that the sun was no longer illuminating the foreground, but the sky was still dense.
And the famous part of the story, he couldn't find his exposure meter.
He couldn't, it was misplaced. But this is the beauty of being a master of the zone system. He didn't panic. He was so intimate with sensitometry and the known luminance of objects that he calculated the proper exposure based entirely on the known brightness of the moon, which he knew to be a Zone 7th or Zone 8th object.
So it was a purely intellectual, on-the-spot technical calculation under immense pressure.
That's what it was. It tells us that the zone system had moved past being a manual reference tool and had become a form of second nature, a deep understanding of light physics. That moment, improvising by moonlight, solidified the image's fame in his later published works.
But the resulting negative was incredibly challenging to print, right? It wasn't perfect when it came out of the developer.
Far from it. That reliance on the moon's known value meant the foreground, which was already rapidly darkening, was severely underexposed. Conversely, the clouds and the moon itself were extremely dense. It was a high-contrast nightmare that only a master printer could ever manage.
And what did that technical difficulty mean for the image's long-term history?
It forced Adams into continuous reinterpretation. He printed Moonrise for nearly 40 years, using increasingly advanced darkroom equipment and techniques to perfect the tonality. He used heavy dodging and burning, selectively lightening and darkening areas to achieve that famous luminosity.
This continuous effort resulted in an unprecedented volume of prints, which eventually gave him his financial independence.
Absolutely. It became by far his most popular and commercially successful image. He made over 1,369 unique prints, mostly in the large 16 by 20-inch format. And the sheer volume and quality ensured that the estimated total value of these original prints today exceeds $25 million.
Wow. Let's discuss the fascinating legal footnotes surrounding Moonrise and the mural project. Since he was working for the government at the time, there was an ownership question, wasn't there?
There was major ambiguity. The mural project technically concluded in 1942, but the 229 negatives he created, including images like the Tetons and the Snake River, were legally the property of the U.S. government. Adams, concerned that the National Archives wouldn't properly care for them, held on to them using various subterfuges, as he called them, to evade queries.
So why did Moonrise legally belong to Adams and not the government if he was on contract?
This is the crucial detail that required external forensic work. Adams was notoriously disciplined about recording his build days for the Interior Department, but for whatever reason, he didn't record the exact date of Moonrise. If he had billed that day, the government owned it. If he hadn't, it was his.
So what was the breakthrough? How did they figure it out?
Decades later, in 1991, Denis Chico of Sky and Telescope magazine performed astronomical calculations. By determining the exact angle and phase of the moon above the horizon relative to the village of Hernandez, he pinpointed the time. 4:49.20 p.m. on November 1st, 1941.
That's incredible.
It is. And because records showed this was a day for which Adams had not billed the Department of the Interior for work, the image legally belonged to him, a perfect alignment of art, history, and science.
The war years also brought a massive, yet often less celebrated chapter to his work, a total philosophical and stylistic departure from his majestic landscapes.
This is so essential for understanding his Emersonian moral code. Adams was deeply distressed by the Japanese-American internment following Pearl Harbor. He viewed it as a profound injustice, especially since so many internees were American citizens. So he requested permission to photograph the Manzanar War Relocation Center in the Owens Valley.
That is an immense risk to his reputation, moving from pure landscape artist to political documentarian.
It was. The resulting photo essay, Born Free and Equal, the story of loyal Japanese Americans, was released with what he called distressing resistance. Many saw the work as disloyal during wartime. He risked his standing with the public to capture candid portraits and documentation of people suffering immense injustice, all because his moral compass demanded he prioritize social responsibility.
It's a powerful contrast. The man celebrated for the immense solitude of the Sierra, using his camera to capture the immense pain and injustice of community detention.
It demonstrates that his rigorous technique was always subservient to his core moral vision. And it should be said, he also contributed to the war effort in a traditional sense by making prints of secret Japanese installations in the Aleutian Islands, which further proved his loyalty, even as he protested Manzanar.
Before we move on, I should note a practical shift in his method that really speaks to his later life. By about 1943, the era of remote backpacking to summits started to wind down for him.
Yes. For many of his later landscapes, he had a dedicated camera platform mounted on the roof of his station wagon. This allowed him to shoot from an elevated vantage point along roadsides, rather than requiring the rugged, multi-day hiking trips of his youth. It was a practical adjustment to age, but it never diminished his ability to capture the light.
Moving into part 4, Adams's influence extends far beyond his own output. He didn't just take pictures. He fundamentally changed the institutional framework for photography itself, establishing it as a fine art.
This institutionalization is arguably as important as the zone system. By 1940, Adams was a key advisor, alongside David H. McAlpin and the curator Beaumont Newhall, in establishing the photography department at the Museum of Modern Art MoMA in New York.
Why was that moment so important? Why was MoMA's involvement such a critical landmark?
Because photography, the mechanical medium, had been historically relegated to a lower status than painting and sculpture. MoMA was the first major American art museum to establish a dedicated, permanent photography department, giving the medium the legitimacy that the group F64 aesthetic had been fighting for nearly a decade.
It signaled that photography was a medium of serious artistic endeavor, not just documentation.
Exactly.
Their aesthetic focus for that first exhibition, 60 photographs. A survey of camera aesthetics cemented this focus on art, but it also drew some criticism, didn't it?
It did. Adams and Newhall were focused on showcasing the artistic excellence of the straight photographers, Weston, Strand, and Adams himself. They wanted to prove that a photograph could be as aesthetically significant as a painting.
But this laser focus on aesthetic quality drew the ire of critics who felt it ignored the communicative vernacular uses of the medium, the photos you'd find in journalism or advertising or science.
Precisely. They were accused of elitism. You had critics famously calling the MoMA exhibit soft music at high tea rather than jazz at a beefsteak supper.
That's a great line.
It is. The criticism was that their focus on technical artistic perfection made the photography feel sanitized and divorced from the gritty reality and diverse utility of the medium.
But for Adams and Newhall, establishing aesthetic excellence was the non-negotiable first step toward achieving full artistic recognition.
It was a political move. They needed to establish a high bar for excellence. They were showcasing the possibilities of photographic vision, arguing that the camera, in the hands of a master, was as powerful as a brush or chisel.
Adams also dedicated a huge amount of time to ensuring that his technical and aesthetic knowledge didn't just die with his generation. He became a dedicated, influential teacher.
He was a tireless educator. In 1945, he formed the first fine art photography department at the California School of Fine Arts, and he immediately recruited the biggest names he could: Dorothea Lange, Imogen Cunningham, and Edward Weston as guest lecturers.
And he formalized his teaching through the Yosemite workshops.
Yes, which he ran annually from 1955 to 1981, attracting thousands of students who wanted to learn the zone system directly from the source.
Now, while he championed the traditional large-format view camera, he wasn't closed off to new technology in his later years. We see him embracing Polaroid.
He had a very close personal and professional relationship with Edwin Land, the founder of the Polaroid Corporation. Adams served as a highly paid consultant with a monthly retainer and produced thousands of unique images using Polaroid's instantaneous products. He named his image El Capitan, Winter Sunrise from 1968, as the one he considered his most memorable Polaroid image.
And he also shifted his equipment choice for some projects.
He did. While the 8x10 and 4x5 view cameras were responsible for his most iconic images later in life, he often favored the 6x6 cm medium format Hasselblad for its portability and excellent negative quality. Moon and Half Dome from 1960 is his favorite image made with that specific camera.
We should probably reiterate his famous stance on color photography, as it's such an essential context for his aesthetic legacy.
Adams was a black and white purist through and through. He found color restrictive and less expressive. He believed that black and white offered a far greater expressive range and could be manipulated via the zone system to produce the bold, dramatic tonal contrasts he craved.
So most of his limited color work was strictly for commercial assignments?
Yes, and he explicitly forbade its posthumous exploitation. He wanted his legacy to be defined by the precision and control of monochrome.
This lifelong commitment to black and white mirrors his unwavering commitment to advocacy, which continued right up until his death in 1984.
His camera was never put down. In the 1970s, he contributed images to publicize Proposition 20, which was a significant effort to regulate development on the California coast. But his most famous advocacy moment in his later years involved a head of state.
Tell us about the Jimmy Carter portrait.
In 1979, President Jimmy Carter commissioned Adams to make the first official photographic portrait of a sitting U.S. president. Adams used this extraordinary opportunity not for small talk or self-promotion, but purely for conservation. During the meeting, he handed Carter a detailed, strongly worded letter advocating for the federal protection of Big Sur and stronger legislation for the Alaskan wilderness.
That's the definition of a conservationist who never misses an opportunity to fight for the land. And his life was recognized for this dual commitment to art and preservation.
In 1980, he received the nation's highest civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, specifically for his efforts to preserve this country's wild and scenic areas both on film and on Earth. It was a culmination of his entire philosophy.
And his legacy is now literally imprinted on the physical landscape itself.
It is. Following his death, Mount Ansel Adams and the surrounding Ansel Adams Wilderness were named in his honor in 1985. And perhaps the most mind-boggling honor of all, connecting his view of the American West to the vastness of the astronomy he studied with his father. Two of his photographs, the Tetons and the Snake River, and a view of the Golden Gate Bridge, were selected for the Voyager Golden Record.
Wait, the records that were launched into deep space?
Yes, selected by Carl Sagan's team to convey information about Earth, our culture, and our planet's natural beauty to possible alien civilizations. Adams's images of the American West are now literally traveling outside our solar system, representing humanity's vision of our wild places.
That just puts a staggering perspective on his commitment. His ashes, fittingly, were scattered on Half Dome at Yosemite National Park.
He died in 1984, leaving a profound and indelible impact not only on fine art photography, but on environmental policy, technical science, and even interstellar communication.
What a remarkable synthesis of passion and technical precision. Looking back at this deep dive, Adams truly succeeded on all fronts because he harnessed the discipline of the pianist and applied it directly to the camera.
He was the technical wizard who standardized photographic exposure with the zone system, ensuring that photographers had a blueprint for achieving their creative vision. He proved that technical precision didn't inhibit art, it enabled it.
And simultaneously, he was the environmental prophet whose majestic images didn't just document nature, but actively became political capital. They helped expand the national park system, notably Kings Canyon, and influence the president. His photographs were advocacy.
The celebrated curator John Sierkowski observed that the love that Americans poured out for the work and person of Ansel Adams is an extraordinary phenomenon, perhaps even unparalleled in our country's response to a visual artist. And that love stemmed from his ability to capture light in such a way that the viewer couldn't help but be moved.
His work was about more than documenting stable scenery. It was about capturing the light that continually redefines that scenery. He didn't capture fixed sculpture, he captured transience.
And if you are taking one final provocative thought to explore from this deep dive, I think you should consider how Adams's belief that solitude, so vital to the individual man, is almost nowhere, resonates in the world today.
He saw the wilderness shrinking and man pushing back that solitude even in his time. His work was a profound call to action, urging us to recognize and preserve the beauty that he so meticulously captured. The question Adams left us with is whether we, the modern audience, still connect the intense, overwhelming beauty of his image to the urgent necessity of conservation and the preservation of solitude.
That's the legacy he asks us to carry forward.
A perfect note to end on. That was the deep dive on Ansel Adams.